What's up, everybody? Red Rocks Exotic Reptiles here, and I thought today I'd go ahead and just kind of show the process that we're going through to set up some grow tanks that we have planned. As you can see, currently we've got a 30-gallon grow tank that we're putting in front of the window. I'm kind of testing to see if maybe the UV through the window, I know that's kind of a hotly debated topic, but see if some of those sun rays will hit the tank and help kind of grow some of the plants without having to use a ton of LED lighting, just because I don't really want to have to buy 4 more LED lights because, you know, they're pretty damn expensive. So, and then we got a 10-gallon down here that is empty for now, just waiting for some more stuff to put in there. But I went ahead and went on over to Petco when they were still having their 50% off all tank sale and bought some more 10 gallons. I think what I'm really going for is I want to put the more like shade heavy plants in this tank here, just since it's against the concrete wall. And then if by any chance that the sunlight does help the plants grow, because I don't know if you can tell right now, but during the certain time of the day, the sun does hit this tank really well. I thought I'd maybe put some highlight plants in there just to also kind of help offset the possible algae growth that can happen, because I do know that is a problem that people will have from putting a tank right in front of a window like that. But I'm hoping that I can also sort of counteract that because we've got a 5.5-pound CO2 cylinder. So most of the time, if you have like a really nice display tank, you're just going to be putting one cylinder to your tank. So say like this, you would just run from the cylinder to the tank. But I'm going to try and have at least 6 or so tanks here. So I'm thinking, and I kind of had to do a lot of research on this, and we're going to find out how well it works, but we've got the regulator, right, that we're going to end up attaching to the cylinder, but then they sell these splitters, right? And I'm kind of curious to see how well, if this gauge can put out enough pressure to apply, for all these tubes. Right now, I'm only going to run 4 just for the ones that we have, but I don't know. I guess we'll see. I mean, this would be a really nice way to split the cylinder without having to buy, 4 more cylinders, because these things are like $100 a pop. And that's super cheap if you can even find one for that price. So we'll see. I'll get it all set up and, get it tested and see how well it works. But, per tank, we've got some sponge filters. Those were just kind of the cheapest option I could find that would still kind of help circulate the water, kind of move the the CO2 around without, getting a whole filter set up. And then, we've got this black tubing. And if you guys are looking to ever set up CO2 in your tanks, if by some chance you haven't researched this, make sure you get tubing that is carbon dioxide or CO2 resistant or like made for it. Because if you use normal airline tubing like this clear stuff you can get at Home Depot, this sort of leaks CO2, like it can actually like dissipate through the tubing. It's not, if I recall, it's not super dangerous, but I mean, I don't want CO2 leaching out of tubes. So especially considering I'm going to have 4, 5, 6 tanks with CO2 running to them. So just want to mitigate as much of that leakage as possible. And then over here, we've actually got this really big, I can't quite remember what it's called. There's essentially like a piston. I think it's called a linear piston that moves back and forth inside this housing. And then it runs the air to these valves, this, I guess, like valve gang valve. And then each one of those, I'm going to run to the sponge filters so I can, again, run multiple sponge filters off of one pump rather than having one for each. So, yeah, I mean, it's, a bit of a setup, and that's what we're in the process of doing here. And I'm going to see if maybe a time lapse is doable with this setup. But yeah, I was just going to show you guys everything we were going to do to get these set up. And of course, can't forget, I'm going to go ahead and use some of this Caribsea Eco Plant substrate. I know a lot of people would recommend the Fluval Stratum or whatever it is, but my budget does not permit that. So we're going to see if possibly this Caribsea can substitute well if I put some fertilizers in it, plus the CO2, everything else I'll be using. I think it'll do fine. And honestly, I think that is what I have in this black tank here. I believe that is all black Caribsea there. And then in the 10-gallon here. And honestly, I was using this as a grow out tank initially, and it was growing like crazy. So I think it really comes down to making sure you put fertilizer in the tank or in the substrate so it can absorb it and then retain it for the plants to use long term. Yeah, and then for any of those who possibly might be wondering, this shelving It supposedly can withhold a couple 100 pounds per shelf, and obviously I think I'm only going to end up doing maybe 1 or 2 tanks at most per shelf. This middle one here, it's just tall enough. I can't really fit anything through it, so that's maybe just going to be the storage shelf. But I thought at the very least, if these can hold a couple 100 pounds, I could put 2 more tanks right here and then 1 or 2 here, depending on if this bows or not. But they're at the bottom. I wouldn't be so much worried it's a tip hazard, versus just the shelving bending. So I didn't want to get too in over my head right away. I just wanted to set these up, see how well the idea works. And then, if we got a lot of growth, we get a lot of orders, which we are recently, then, we can swing 2 or 3 more tanks and get those set up. And of course, like I said, we've got the expandability with the check valves, or not the check valves, the bubble counters down there with that splitter, and then we still have a couple more open slots there, about 4 on the gang valves. So yeah, anyway, so that's kind of that. So I'm gonna go ahead and try and do a time lapse of this. Please forgive me if it sucks. This is maybe the 3rd one I've ever done in my life, so I will try my best. Thanks, guys. So I just wanted to make a quick note for any of you who may have noticed in the time lapse, there's a lot of murky water inside of these Carib Sea bags. It's what they claim is helpful bacteria, quote unquote, that essentially gets the soil kick-started. They even say no rinsing. But I will tell you, from what I recall with this black substrate, it is super cloudy. Like, as soon as I go to fill this up, you'll see it will be, pretty much brown. So, I know it's sort of a myth to some people about, pre-rinsing the soil, whether it helps or doesn't. I didn't really care because this isn't a display tank for me. This is strictly just for growing plants. I might have some snails in here, so even if it does get a little cloudy, I'm not going to be upset about it, and it'll just go away with over the time with water changes. So, if you accidentally throw like this bacterialized whatever soil substrate into your tanks, don't worry about the cloudiness. It will go away eventually. So just something to keep in mind. All right, so got all the gravel in so far. I'm not going to fill it up with water just yet because I want to get the tubing and everything set up first. So right now I already have clear tubing for the airline to the pump, or to the sponge, cut, and I think it's in a good spot. I gave myself a little extra slack just in case I want to move this tank around, so that's nice. Now what I'm doing next is I kind of just dry fitted this regulator onto the CO2 tank, and I say dry fit because I'm going to eventually take the regulator back off, and maybe I'll show you guys. But on this valve here, on the portion that goes into the regulator, you're actually going to want to use some Teflon tape, or plumber's tape I think is what some people call it. This just sort of helps to make sure you have an airtight fit between the regulator and that valve. You'll know if you don't, because when you go to turn this on, you'll hear sort of like a hissing noise, or, depending on if the gas, you might even smell it. And again, CO2 is not something you really want to be breathing in, or even like your pets or small animals. So we're just going to go ahead and play it safe and just, put some Teflon tape on. I think this stuff's like, I don't know, $5, if that, at Home Depot or Lowe's, home improvement stores, whatever. And yeah, so right now I'm just cutting this rat's nest of carbon tubes. I'm trying to kind of map out, which bubble counters I want to run to each individual tank, kind of figuring that out. So I don't know if I'll make a time lapse of that. That's a little bit more boring, but yeah, we'll just keep trucking. Oh, and I did figure, just for the sake of the video, I would show you guys this in case you've never actually seen how these work with CO2 bubble counters. So essentially what you have is this little cylinder, right? This glass cylinder. So every part that you see has texture on it can unscrew. So this glass cylinder essentially can be completely removed by itself. So you've got the bottom portion that screws in to the regulator, this splitter essentially. If you only had one bubble counter, it would just go in right at the bottom here, but since we've got this splitter installed, it gives us 6 more that we can install. But from there, if you want to, service the cylinder, you would unscrew this bottom portion from the cylinder body, and then you can clean it out, or whatever you need. Then the next portion, you can take the top off. So this next textured piece here, that's usually where I'll fill this up, because you need to put water, usually distilled, or I've used the tank water from my tanks in these, and it does cloud them up a little bit, because when you think about it, you know, it's not entirely clean water that we'd be putting in those. So I do recommend DI water, or any other kind of like water you can get from a jug at like a store. So anyway, so you fill it up from that top there, screw it back on, and then this last piece, it actually comes apart. I'm doing this one-handed, so cut me a little slack with my speed here. But you've got that little nipple essentially right at the top there. And what that does is that is what, if you can kind of see here, that's what the tubing hooks up to, right? So it's sort of a trick, because you have to attach the tubing to that nipple, but you don't want to crank this down yet, because then you still have to twist the body on, and then it kind of makes the tubing curl up. So what I do is I just leave the top knob sort of loose, and then I hold the tubing while I spin this on, so that way the tubing isn't coiling up from you spinning it. It just kind of spins on the nipple. It's kind of hard to show with just one hand, but you know, if you guys find yourself using these, or if you're curious how they work, just wanted to give a little demonstration, that's all. And I also wanted to give one more tip while I'm doing this, in case any of you who are watching are sort of doing this similar thing, or setting up your first CO2 setup, just so you know in the future, things I wish I had known in the first place. When you're cutting this carbon tubing, or honestly really any air tubing for aquariums or anything of the like, you really want a flush cut on the tubing itself, meaning like a 90-degree cut, because when you use like a pair of scissors or something, right, and you just snip it, well, there's sometimes little edges that you'll miss because the scissors just kind of crimp it and then tear it. But there's these really nice things called tube cutters, and I mean, you can get these for pretty cheap anywhere. I mean, I think this is just like an unbranded generic tube cutter. You know, most people use them for, you know, cutting small PVC pipe, or for, you know, if you have a 3D printer, they usually tell you to use this to cut your boat in tubes, That's where I have this. I have a million of these. Oh, and they're also used for misting tubing setups for reptiles a lot too. So you'll probably stumble upon one of these if you ever order like a misting kit or something. But anyways, the idea with this is all you're doing is it's essentially like a clip, you know, like a closed clip, and you're just going to lay the tubing inside of it like this, right? And then you're going to let gravity do the work for you, and then you just simply pinch it, right? So that V shape in the bottom of it forces the tubing to sit at the right angle, and that blade, the way it's cut, just slices it perfectly on the 90-degree angle. So if you're having a problem with air leaks, or you know, your misting systems leaking, this is a really good thing to get for your kind of future investment. All right, sweet. So we are on the other side of that tubing now. We've got it connected to the cylinder on the bottom there towards the regulator. And I kind of just wanted to show one quick tip. If you're going to use a glass, or I think ceramic may also have this issue, CO2 diffuser, you're going to want to make sure that when you're pushing this tubing on, do not push by this bend here. Like, do not hold this and push. I've heard horror stories of people that did that, and this is the weakest portion usually of CO2 diffusers. You'll go to push that and it snaps, and then you'll just slice your finger against the broken glass on the other side. So really be careful when you're doing this. In fact, I'm going to take that suction cup off, and I'm going to hold the whole piece to kind of support it against my weight, and I'm going to spin the tip into the carbon tubing. Rather than forcing it and pushing really hard, I'm using that twisting motion to kind of assist me in getting it on. And of course, I'm going to try and do this at a little bit of a better angle, but I mean, just doing that alone, I hardly had to push at all. And like I said, that twisting motion, not leveraging off of the cylinder here, I'm grabbing the whole thing and really pinching at the neck here and just spinning. And sometimes you might get a little bit of a gap here if you absolutely can't. I wouldn't try and force it, because again, you know, forcing any bearing down, I guess is the way to put it, on any of these glass diffusers is not a good idea. So worst case, you can always get a little bit of water maybe, or heat the end of this tube just really lightly with like a hair dryer or a heat gun, but don't go crazy. You don't want to melt it. And just gently, you know, work it on to the end. And then from there, we can get our suction cup on. And then we're just going to figure out where in the tank we want this. I think my idea is that typically you want, and I know this is again sort of a debated topic, but my best experience has been when you get, say, the airflow or the bubbles from a filter to interact with the CO2 bubbles, it makes it circulate in the tank longer, and it kind of helps the plants use it for longer. Because if you just have, say, your CO2 diffuser like at the very top of the tank, those bubbles are just going to go straight to the surface and they'll never actually sit inside of the water. So the longer you can keep those bubbles distributing inside the tank, the longer the plants have to utilize it, essentially. So I know, again, that, like I said, that's sort of a debated topic, but that's what I've used and it's what's worked for me. So just take it for what it is. All right, so I think we're finally ready for some water to fill up in these tanks here. But again, if anyone's following along for their own CO2 setup, I just wanted to mention like a quick word of advisory. And I can't recall if this is exactly the case, but if you have a ceramic diffuser, like what's in these guys here, that white, kind of like, it's almost kind of like pumice if you've ever felt that before. If I recall, you're not supposed to let it sit in the water without gas running through it because, and in fact, you might be able to kind of see, I might be right, but essentially what happens is the water inside the tank will start to saturate through that CO2 diffuser, and then it kind of fills this whole chamber with water, and then eventually when the CO2 comes through, it has to push all that water back out through the pumice stone there, so that way the gas can start to diffuse into bubbles. So I'm going to try and leave these out of the water for now until I have gas running through them, and then turn it on once it's submerged, so that way it's, not clogged with water. So I just wanted to mention that just in the event that any of you are watching this who are trying to set something up yourself too. So we've got the tanks filled up with water now, so I want to go ahead and check that the CO2 regulator is working, but I forgot a crucial step of filling the cylinder with water. So I know I gave the advice of using distilled or purified water to fill these, but I didn't have any and it forgot, so I'm using just water from the sink. We'll see if it scales up from the calcium from my tap water, but hopefully not. But I just wanted to show quickly how I sort of did this. So I've got the tube running to the top half here, and then I've got this second piece. Well, I just want to twist off this second piece that I can fill this with water, and you don't usually want to fill it the whole way. You want to leave a little chamber. You're just using that little nipple there to watch the bubbles go, and it sort of helps you regulate, how many bubbles per second is what they call that you want going into the tank, and that is controlled by this little valve here left. And I'll show you guys probably when you twist it left, that allows more air to seep through, and then it pushes it into the tank. But we're gonna leave it just closed for now, just so we can kind of check and see how these are all working. But I just wanted to show how I get these off, right? So I'm gonna twist that top nut off, right? So we got that, and then here's the nipple that the tube comes onto. I'm gonna just hold the tube with my fingers while I twist the top off. And I know this isn't a very good angle. Let's try that, right? So I'm holding the tube so it doesn't coil up from me spinning the top, and then I'm spinning the top of the cylinder off eventually. There we go, cool. Now I have just a little pipette that I use, and I just shoot some water in there, fill it up a little halfway, if not just a little bit more. And that's it. And then we're just going to put it back on. I'm going to hold that tube again so it can spin on the nipple while spinning the lid eventually. And I try to get these tight, but not so tight that you'll crack I think these are actually plastic, maybe they're glass, but you don't want to crack those because obviously then you're going to let that gas out, water will leak. So just do it gently, but tight so it doesn't leak. Then I'm going to get that last nut on, same thing, give it a good spin, finger tight. Just kind of helps the tube press against the top of it so there's no leaking. But yeah, that's how you fill those bubble counters. And like I said, eventually I'm going to go through, I'm going to fill this last one behind here. And the idea is, right, I'm going to show you guys here. So you've got the regulator, right, coming out of here. And then on a normal setup, you would just have one of these bubble counters just right here, and that's it. But we've got this big splitter because I needed multiple tanks. So this is what the original, it's kind of, I forget what it's called, like the bubble dial, essentially. So right now I've got it all the way off because I just wanted to make sure everything was tight fitting and I don't hear any hissing from this regulator. And I don't know if you see that white PTFE thread that I put on, but no leaks, so that's great. And then we can actually see we've got pressure, so that's a good sign. And I've got it plugged in, so it is actively regulating. But all I'm going to end up doing is filling up the rest of these with water, and then I'm going to release this to allow the gas to pass through. And then I'm going to check the bubble counters to see how many bubbles are coming out, and then check obviously the CO2 diffuser at the end to make sure I see that those bubbles diffusing from that ceramic piece. So anyways, we'll see how that looks. All right, sweet. So I wanted to go ahead and just show it in action here. So I've got these back 3 bubble counters running. And it seems to be working pretty well, actually. But so here's something I just learned as I was doing this, right? And it makes sense. I don't really know what the internals of this splitter look like, but I can imagine it's maybe just like a cylinder in the middle, and then there's, you know, cuts in the aluminum that run to each nozzle. Well, say if they're sharing the equal pressure, right? You've got one in of where the gas is coming in at. These are all sharing the same pressure, essentially. So say if I let this one take more of the bubbles, more of the gas, the other 2 are going to start going slower because now this one's using more of the gas. I guess it's kind of simple when you think about it, but now if I turn this one off, it's kind of hard to see maybe on camera, but now the other 2 bubbles, they're now splitting the pressure that this one was getting equally. So now they're going a little bit faster, and I wonder if you could tell if I block this one, if the one on the left, you'll see it increase ever so slightly, but it's a bit more noticeable when I was first kind of doing it. And you can almost kind of tell just as I turn these back on, they all sort of get down to the same pace. But it's a lot of fine tuning, and kind of having this valve down here does help a lot too. But yeah, you want to start from here and then work your way up towards these, so that way you can kind of gauge, you know, how much you need. So just a little tip that I noticed. All right, so here we are a couple days later. I don't want to give too much away just because we got a couple products in there that we're trying to grow, but yeah, all the tanks look good. CO2's pumping, air pumps are looking good, the air sponges. We even got the 10 gallon on the bottom running. I've got everything set up on a timer here. Now, for you electricians out there, don't cringe too hard. I know this isn't amazing. I'm going to try and figure out something I can do long term, but right now I only have the one timer and I don't want to use a bunch of different outlets just for 3 plugs. So definitely got to figure something out in the future for that. And then yes, I did end up getting another 10 gallon tank. So we're going to start doing a bit more production here. But yeah, I will update with some more information here in the coming weeks and possibly explain the lighting setup, what we're growing, and kind of what our process is. But in the meantime, guys, thank you so much for watching the video if you hung out this long. And if you want to see more in the future, let us know. Hit us up on all of our social medias, Red Rocks Exotic Reptiles on Instagram and Facebook, and our Morph Market as well. As always, guys, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for watching.